Minister, as you will be aware, the recommendations contained within the Citizens' Assembly report on biodiversity loss have not been met with universal approval, despite the glow and spin that has been given to it. It also comes in the context of fears around mandatory re-wetting of drained peat farmland and the annihilation of many farmers' capacity to sustain a livelihood on the land, or indeed to pass the farm on to the next generation. And I know that only 2 weeks ago I hosted a cross-party briefing on this very issue, which was well attended by TDs and senators in this House, and I thank them for their attendance. Minister, I also acknowledge your attendance and thank you for attending also. At that briefing, Minister, as you are aware, farmers did express their genuine and well-founded concerns and fears. They also stated quite clearly that there had been little or no consultation, little or no dialogue. And, the fears are well-founded. But, if farmers are custodians of the land, they have also, always taken care of the environment. They've passed their farms down to the next generation in good order. And I believe it's wrong to scapegoat farmers in any way. I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be fairness, there needs to be respect, and there needs to be dialogue. And I know, Minister, that you will have heard this at the IFA meeting in Tullamore in my own county of Offaly as well, which took place last week, where you would have heard directly from other farmers in that room. And their concerns are well founded. There is a tendency and a habit of expecting farmers to take everything lying down, and to expect rural communities to accept everything and take everything lying down. As we know, there's two sides to every story. People want to play their part, but if we are to bring everybody along, collaboration is key. And we must also admit that not every proposal is going to be a correct proposal. We all want to do our bit for the environment, that goes without saying, but not every proposal will be suitable or will be appropriate. And there needs to be a realisation of that sometimes there is overzealous ambition which ignores the voices of those who are affected. And that's wrong. That's fundamentally wrong. And in this case, the voice of the farming community, I believe, is being ignored. I do welcome moves there during the week by the European People's Party in Brussels to reject the nature restoration law, because they see the flaws. They see the flaws in this proposed law. And as I said earlier, very often the flaws aren't seen in time, and then we have a disaster or an issue that's made worse by actions taken. So we don't need that. And I do want to commend the farming organisations for raising the issues and indeed representing the farmers. The ICMSA and the IFA have been very vocal on this particular issue. In respect to the biodiversity report, it is clear from even a cursory reading of this report that attempts are being made to consolidate and normalise an essentially elitist form of environmental ambition. Thankfully, as I said, we've seen a pushback in the EU Parliament in respect to the nature restoration law, and they see the flaws, as I said earlier. The tide may be turning, Minister, as more and more people wake up to the reality of what is happening and the impact that these EU laws will have on farm incomes and indeed on food security. Is anybody thinking about food security here? I mean, we saw the vulnerabilities when we had the outbreak of the Ukrainian war, and where certain food products were becoming obviously less common on the shelves because of that war, mainly grain products. But is anybody thinking ahead here about food security? And I'd just like to raise that point very strongly, because it is a valid point. The report before us today, however, is also just plain bogus, with a number of assumptions barely reflecting reality at all. Farmers, as I said previously, are already moving heaven and earth to be environmentally compliant, because they have to be in the majority of the schemes. And in the majority of cases that, they're actually doing more to nurture and nourish the soil and the land than all of the eco-NGOs combined. A lot of these people have never set foot on a farm. They're academics behind desks, they've never set foot on a farm. So I believe it's wrong to ignore the voice of the farming community in this regard. Yet what does this report recommend? More financial support for eco-NGOs, but more levies and fines for farmers and for agri-exports, which will destabilise our economy. It would be laughable if it were not so dangerously absurd. Indeed, I have rarely read a report more enthralled to the idea of an overzealous environmental regulation. This report reads like a wish list of punitive recommendations, dressed up in the fuzzy and childish language of those who haven't a clue about what it takes to keep a financially stable agriculture sector going. And as I said earlier, we need collaboration. We don't need to be dictated to in rural Ireland. Minister, I do want to point out too, the report did not mention in any shape or form the ash dieback situation, which I found peculiar. I really did, because I attended a well-attended meeting in Thurles a number of weeks ago now at this stage. And this is a very serious issue affecting thousands of acres across this state, but it's also affecting wildlife. And not one mention of that issue in this report, where we have a rotting crop that's not being dealt with. So it would appear that there are gaps in this report, and I was disappointed to see the ash dieback situation, as I said, which is a serious eco-disaster, not being addressed and not being mentioned in any shape or form. Forestry was mentioned, but not this situation. And I would call on you maybe to make recommendations that the ash dieback situation would be included in the report. Thank you.